The execution chamber buzzed with alien technology as holographic cameras surrounded the platform. Representatives from 17 different species watched through their respective viewing devices, each designed to capture the electromagnetic spectrum their kind could perceive. The Zephyrian Council had made sure this moment would be broadcast across half the galaxy. Marcus Chen stood on the platform, his 17-year-old frame looking impossibly small against the towering alien architecture. His hands were bound with energy restraints that hummed with a low frequency, designed specifically to contain human neural activity. The boy's dark hair fell across his eyes, but his chin remained raised in defiance. The human-designated Marcus Chen has been found guilty of terrorism against peaceful Zephyrian colonies, announced High Arbiter Veltar, his crystalline voice resonating through translation devices. His actions resulted in the destruction of 3 mining stations and the deaths of over 200 innocent beings. The crowd of alien dignitaries murmured their approval. Humans had been a problem ever since they'd been discovered on their little blue planet 50 years ago. Unlike other species that had gracefully submitted to Zephyrian rule, humans possessed an irritating tendency toward rebellion. This execution would serve as a warning to other human settlements scattered across the outer rim. Marcus lifted his head and spoke, his young voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. I did what I had to do. You came to our worlds, enslaved our people, and called it peace. If protecting my family makes me a terrorist, then I'm proud to be one. High Arbiter Veltar's 4 eyes narrowed. Your family chose to resist lawful occupation. The consequences were their own responsibility. My mother was a teacher. My sister was 8 years old. Marcus's voice cracked slightly, but his resolve remained firm. They died because they wouldn't tell you where the resistance fighters were hiding. They died because you couldn't break them. The chamber fell silent. Even among the alien audience, there was something unsettling about the boy's calm acceptance of his fate. Most species, when faced with execution, would beg or bargain. Humans, it seemed, preferred to make speeches. The sentence will be carried out immediately, Veltar declared, gesturing to the execution device. It was a sphere of contained antimatter, designed to provide instant disintegration. Clean, efficient, and guaranteed to leave nothing behind. As the device powered up, its blue glow casting eerie shadows across the chamber, Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of his father, somewhere out in the void between stars. The old man had vanished 3 years ago, after the first wave of Zephyrian attacks on Earth. Most people assumed he was dead. Marcus knew better. His father had many names across the galaxy. The Zephyrians called him the Ghost of the Void. The Keltaran Empire knew him as the Harvester of Worlds. To the peaceful Andorian Republic, he was simply Death's shadow. But to Marcus, he would always be Dad, the man who taught him to ride a bicycle and helped with homework. What the galaxy didn't understand about humans was their capacity for love and the terrible things that love could drive them to do. Marcus had learned this lesson watching his father's transformation from a gentle archaeologist into something that made entire star systems whisper his name in fear. The antimatter sphere reached full charge. High Arbiter Veltar raised his hand to give the final command. Let this serve as a lesson to all who would oppose the rightful order of civilized space. Marcus opened his eyes one last time and smiled. Not the broken smile of the defeated, but something else entirely. Something that made several alien observers step back from their viewing platforms. My father always told me that humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology or our weapons, Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. It was our ability to love something more than we love our own lives. You're about to learn what that means. The antimatter sphere activated. For a brief moment, Marcus Chen existed as pure energy, his consciousness scattered across the quantum foam before finally dissolving into nothing. The execution was complete, broadcast live to millions of beings across known space. In the silence that followed, High Arbiter Veltar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. One less human terrorist to worry about. The boy's final words had been meaningless bravado, the kind of empty threats defeated enemies always made. But deep in the space between galaxies, something stirred. A ship that existed in the gaps between reality, powered by technologies that made Zephyrian science look like a child's toy, received the quantum echo of a young man's death. Its sole occupant sat motionless for several minutes, processing what he had witnessed. Dr. James Chen had once been the galaxy's leading expert on xenoarchaeology. He had devoted his life to understanding ancient civilizations and their technologies. When the Zephyrians invaded, he had tried diplomacy, then negotiation, then desperate bargaining for his family's safety. Nothing had worked. So he had done what any father would do. He had taken his research into the dark corners of the universe and found things that should have remained buried, technologies left behind by species that had transcended physical existence, weapons that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics, knowledge that came with a price measured in sanity and soul. For 3 years he had hunted Zephyrian forces across the galaxy, each attack more devastating than the last. He had hoped that eventually they would release his family in exchange for his surrender. He had been naive. Now, as he watched his son's final moments through quantum entanglement, Dr. James Chen made a decision that would reshape the political landscape of known space. He reached for controls that hadn't been touched in months, systems that he had sworn never to use again. The ship began to move, reality bending around it as it translated through dimensions that had no names in any living language. Behind it, space itself seemed to scream. The Zephyrian Empire had just made the greatest mistake in its 1,000-year history. They had killed the son of the man the galaxy called Baba Yaga, and now that man was coming for them. The execution of Marcus Chen was over. What came next would be remembered as the beginning of the end for everyone who had watched it happen. The first sign of trouble came 12 hours after Marcus Chen's execution. The Zephyrian monitoring station at Kepler 442 simply vanished from all communication networks. No distress signal, no final transmission, just silence where once there had been the constant chatter of interstellar traffic control. Admiral Kexithera of the Zephyrian Fourth Fleet initially dismissed it as a technical malfunction. Deep space monitoring stations were notorious for equipment failures, especially in sectors where space-time itself was unstable. He ordered a repair ship to investigate and turned his attention to more pressing matters. The repair ship never arrived. According to their navigation computers, they had reached the station's coordinates, but found nothing except empty space and trace amounts of exotic radiation that made their instruments scream warnings about dimensional instability. By the time Admiral Kexithera realized they were dealing with something beyond normal space piracy, 3 more stations had disappeared. Each one was simply erased from existence, leaving behind only the faintest quantum signature that suggested impossible technologies at work. High Command was not pleased. High Arbiter Veltar personally contacted the Admiral, his crystalline features twisted with annoyance. "This is clearly human resistance activity. Deploy sufficient force to end these terrorist attacks immediately." Admiral Kexithera had served in 17 different campaigns across the galaxy. He had seen the aftermath of human resistance attacks, and this was something entirely different. Humans used crude explosives and stolen Zephyrian weapons. They didn't possess technology capable of erasing matter from existence at the quantum level. But orders were orders. The Admiral deployed half his fleet to patrol the affected sectors, confident that superior Zephyrian technology would quickly identify and eliminate whatever human cell was responsible for these attacks. The hunt lasted exactly 6 hours. The battlecruiser Eternal Glory was the pride of the Zephyrian fleet, a kilometer-long vessel armed with enough firepower to level a small moon. Its shields could withstand direct hits from antimatter torpedoes, and its sensors could detect a single human heartbeat from 3 star systems away. Captain Mordeth was reviewing patrol reports when his tactical officer suddenly stiffened at his station. "Sir, we're detecting an unknown vessel approaching from the galactic rim. Configuration unknown, energy signature unlike anything in our databases." "Display it on screen," Mordeth ordered, settling back in his command chair. Whatever primitive human ship was foolish enough to challenge the Eternal Glory would serve as an excellent example to other resistance cells. The main display flickered to life, showing a view of empty space. Captain Mordeth frowned. "I see nothing, Lieutenant. Check your sensors." "Sir, the sensors are functioning perfectly. The vessel is definitely there, but it's difficult to focus on. Our computers keep losing target lock." Captain Mordeth was about to demand a more detailed explanation when the stars began to move. Not the gentle drift of stellar motion, but something far more disturbing. The very fabric of space seemed to twist and fold. reality becoming fluid around a point that existed somewhere between dimensions. Then they saw it. The ship that emerged from folded space defied every principle of engineering that the Zephyrians understood. It was simultaneously ancient and impossibly advanced, its hull crafted from materials that seemed to absorb light and thought in equal measure. Strange symbols covered its surface. Writing that hurt to look at directly and suggested concepts that had no translation in any known language. "Sir," the tactical officer whispered, his voice barely audible, "I'm reading power levels that are—" "That's impossible. The energy output is greater than our entire star system." Captain Mordeth opened his mouth to order an attack, but the words died in his throat. Something about the alien vessel triggered every survival instinct evolution had given his species. This was not a ship built by any known civilization. This was something that should have remained buried in the dark corners of the universe. A transmission came through on all frequencies simultaneously, bypassing their communication systems entirely and speaking directly into the minds of everyone aboard the Eternal Glory. The voice that emerged was human, but changed by exposure to forces that existed beyond normal space-time. "I am Dr. James Chen," the voice said, each word carrying harmonics that made reality shiver. "You killed my son. Now you will learn what that means." Captain Mordeth tried to respond, tried to demand surrender or issue threats, but his vocal cords had ceased to function. Around him, his crew stood frozen as the alien ship approached, not paralyzed by any weapon, but simply unable to comprehend action in the presence of something so fundamentally wrong. The ship passed through the Eternal Glory's shields as if they didn't exist. The battlecruiser's weapon systems activated automatically, pouring enough firepower into the approaching vessel to destroy a small fleet. The energy beams and missiles simply vanished upon contact with the strange hull, absorbed into whatever impossible materials composed its structure. "Your species believes in order through strength," Dr. Chen's voice continued, now speaking from inside their own ship's communication system. "You have built an empire on the principle that superior technology grants the right to rule. Allow me to demonstrate the flaw in your logic." The Eternal Glory began to change. Its hull, forged from the strongest alloys known to Zephyrian science, became fluid. Metal flowed like water, rearranging itself according to patterns that followed no earthly physics. The ship's massive engines folded inward, their exotic matter cores becoming decorative, spirals that served no function except to inspire madness in anyone who studied them too closely. Captain Mordeth watched his magnificent battlecruiser transform into something that belonged in a museum of abstract art rather than a military fleet. His crew had not been harmed, but they found themselves trapped inside a vessel that operated according to rules they could not understand. "This is your first lesson," Dr. Chen announced. "Technology without wisdom is merely sophisticated barbarism. Your empire has forgotten that knowledge and power are not the same thing." The transformed battlecruiser began to move, its new configuration somehow achieving faster-than-light travel, despite having no visible engines. Captain Mordeth realized with growing horror that they were being transported somewhere, carried along by forces that made their understanding of physics seem laughably primitive. Behind them, the rest of Admiral Kexathera's fleet watched in stunned silence as their flagship was reshaped like clay in the hands of an artist. Several junior officers suggested immediate retreat, but Admiral Kexathera found himself unable to give such an order. Professional pride warred with survival instinct as he tried to process what he had witnessed. In the depths of space, Dr. James Chen piloted his impossible vessel toward the next target on his list. The Zephyrian Empire had established their dominance through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. They were about to discover that there were things in the universe that made their achievements look like the finger paintings of children. The hunt for humanity's Baba Yaga had only just begun. High Arbiter Veltar stood before the assembled Zephyrian High Council, his crystalline features reflecting the panic that was spreading through their empire like a virus. The holographic displays surrounding the council chamber showed the latest reports, each one more disturbing than the last. 17 battle fleets have been neutralized, he announced, his voice struggling to maintain its usual authoritative tone. Not destroyed, neutralized. The enemy appears to be collecting our ships and crews rather than eliminating them. Council member Zarseth leaned forward, her 6 eyes focused intently on the tactical displays. "Explain neutralized, High Arbiter. Our forces either exist or they do not." Veltar activated a recording from the sole survivor of the 7th Fleet's encounter with the human vessel. The hologram showed Admiral Kexithera, but his appearance had been altered in ways that defied medical explanation. His crystalline skin now held patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly, and his voice carried harmonics that suggested exposure to impossible geometries. The human calls himself Chen, the Admiral's image reported, his words coming in carefully measured syllables. He has shown us truths about the universe that our science never suspected. We are unharmed, but we can no longer serve the Empire as we once did. We have seen too much. The recording continued, showing glimpses of the transformed Zephyrian vessels. Ships that had once been paragons of military engineering now resembled living creatures, their hulls breathing with unknown rhythms. Weapon systems had been rebuilt into organs that served functions beyond warfare, purposes that the human apparently understood but refused to explain. Council member Thexara spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. These ships still contain our crews, our officers, our most experienced personnel. Are they prisoners? Have they been converted to serve this human? Unknown, Veltar admitted. They claim to serve willingly, but their mental patterns show exposure to cognitive frameworks that our psychologists cannot classify. They speak of seeing the universe as it truly is, of understanding humanity's place in cosmic history. The truth was more disturbing than Veltar was willing to admit to the Council. The captured crews hadn't been brainwashed or tortured. According to all medical scans, they were healthier than they had ever been. Their minds expanded in ways that seemed to grant them access to perceptions beyond normal Zephyrian capabilities. They spoke of Dr. James Chen not as a conqueror, but as a teacher, someone who had shown them that their Empire's understanding of physics was based on fundamental misconceptions about the nature of reality itself. What does this human want? Demanded Councilmember Yexthon. Surely he has terms for ending these attacks. Veltar activated another recording. This one received just hours earlier. Dr. Chen's image appeared in the council chamber, but the recording quality was strange, as if the camera had been unable to properly focus on his features. The man who had once been a gentle xenoarchaeologist now carried himself with the confidence of someone who had stared into the abyss and found it lacking. Members of the Zephyrian High Council, Chen began, his voice carrying that same unsettling quality that seemed to speak directly to the listener's consciousness. You seek negotiations, but you fundamentally misunderstand the situation. This is not a war. This is an education. The council members shifted uncomfortably as Chen continued. For 50 years, your empire has spread across the galaxy like a disease, consuming weaker civilizations and calling it progress. You have mistaken technological superiority for evolutionary advancement, confusing the ability to build weapons with the wisdom to use them responsibly. High Arbiter Veltar found himself leaning forward, despite his better judgment. There was something hypnotic about the human's words, a certainty that suggested access to truths beyond normal understanding. Humanity represents something you have never encountered, Chen explained, his image seeming to look directly at each council member individually. We are not a species that accepts subjugation gracefully. We do not bow to superior force. When you threaten what we love, we become something that transcends your understanding of power itself. The recording shifted, showing glimpses of the transformed Zephyrian fleet. Ships that had once terrorized entire star systems now moved through space like living artworks, their crews working in harmony with technologies that operated according to principles the Empire's scientists couldn't begin to comprehend. Your crews are learning, Chen continued. Learning that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than your empire's rigid hierarchies could ever accommodate. They are discovering that cooperation can achieve what domination never could. Council member Zarseth spoke directly to the recording, as if Chen could hear her response. What do you want from us, human? What are your terms? Chen's expression didn't change, but somehow his presence became more intense. I want you to understand what you have done, not just to my family, not just to my species, but to countless civilizations across this galaxy. I want you to truly comprehend the cost of your empire's existence. The recording ended, leaving the council chamber in oppressive silence. Outside the windows, the capital city of Zephyr Prime continued its usual routines, but there was an undercurrent of fear that grew stronger with each passing hour. Word of the impossible human was spreading throughout the population, carried by whispers and encrypted communications that somehow found their way to Dr. Chen himself. Recommendations? Veltar asked, though he suspected that traditional military solutions would prove useless against an enemy who could reshape reality at will. Mobilize the entire fleet, suggested Council Member Thexara. Bring every ship, every weapon, every technological advantage we possess to bear against this single human. Surely even he cannot stand against the combined might of our entire civilization. But even as he spoke the words, Thexara knew they sounded hollow. The reports from their encounters with Chen suggested that conventional force was not merely ineffective, but actively counterproductive. Each attempt to destroy his vessel only seemed to provide him with additional resources and information about Zephyrian capabilities. High Arbiter, Veltar made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Prepare a diplomatic envoy. If this human wishes to educate us, perhaps we should listen to what he has to say. The other council members stared at him in shock. The Zephyrian Empire did not negotiate with terrorists, especially not human ones. But as reports continued to arrive showing more fleets transformed into unrecognizable configurations, they began to realize that their traditional approaches might not be sufficient. Somewhere in the space between galaxies, Dr. James Chen received notification of the Zephyrian decision to attempt diplomacy. He allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine expression of pleasure he had experienced since watching his son die. The real education was about to begin. The diplomatic meeting took place in neutral space, at coordinates that Dr. Chen had specified through means that bypassed every Zephyrian communication system. The location he chose was the ruins of Zerion, a dead world that had once hosted a thriving civilization before the Empire's arrival 3 centuries earlier. High Arbiter Veltar arrived aboard the flagship Infinite Majesty, accompanied by a full diplomatic corps and enough firepower to level a small continent. Despite his official willingness to negotiate, he had no intention of appearing weak before a human terrorist, regardless of his apparent technological advantages. Dr. Chen was waiting for them on the planet's surface, standing alone among the crystalline ruins of what had once been a magnificent city. The Zephyrian landing party approached cautiously, their sensors detecting energy patterns that made their equipment issue constant warnings about dimensional instability. Up close, Veltar could see that the human had been changed by his exposure to whatever technologies he had discovered. Dr. Chen still appeared fundamentally human, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he had looked upon the fundamental structure of reality itself and found it wanting. High Arbiter, Chen greeted him, his voice carrying easily across the ruins despite the lack of atmosphere. The diplomatic party's environmental suits registered no external sound, meaning the human was somehow speaking directly into their minds. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Veltar activated his translation matrix, though he suspected it would prove inadequate for whatever conversation was about to take place. You demanded this meeting, human. State your terms for ending these attacks against the Empire. Chen smiled, an expression that was somehow more unsettling than any threat could have been. You still don't understand. This isn't about terms or treaties or political arrangements. This is about education. Please, walk with me. Against his better judgment, Veltar found himself following the human deeper into the ruins. The crystalline structures around them had been grown rather than built, their mathematical pattern suggesting a civilization that had achieved harmony between technology and nature. The Zerionites were artists, Chen explained, running his hand along a wall that seemed to sing in response to his touch. They spent 3,000 years creating beauty that could be appreciated by dozens of different species. Their cities were living symphonies, their technology indistinguishable from poetry. Veltar remembered the Zerion campaign from his historical studies. It had been considered one of the Empire's cleanest conquests, completed with minimal casualties and efficient resource extraction. The Zerionites refused to submit to lawful authority. Their elimination was necessary for regional stability. Their elimination, Chen repeated, his voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline ruins resonate with remembered songs. Tell me, High Arbiter, what did the Empire gain from destroying this world? Strategic positioning, Veltar replied automatically. Zerion controlled 3 major hyperspace routes. Its conquest was essential for maintaining trade efficiency in this sector. Chen nodded as if he had expected that answer. And how much trade value has this sector generated since the Xerianites were eliminated? Veltar hesitated. The truth was that the Xerian system had become a dead zone, avoided by most traders due to persistent reports of spatial anomalies and navigation failures. The strategic value that had justified the conquest had never materialized. You see the pattern, Chen continued, leading them to what had once been the planet's central plaza. The Empire conquers civilizations that have achieved something beautiful or unique, extracting their resources and calling it progress. But you never seem to understand what you've destroyed. They stopped before a monument that defied easy description. It appeared to be a sculpture, but one that existed in more than 3 dimensions, its form shifting based on the observer's perspective and emotional state. Even through their environmental suits, the diplomatic party could feel its influence on their consciousness. The Xerianites called this the memory of all things, Chen explained. It was designed to preserve the experiences and achievements of every species they encountered. A living library of galactic civilization, containing knowledge that your empire has spent centuries trying to rediscover. Veltar stared at the monument, beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been lost. The Zephyrian Empire prided itself on technological advancement, but much of that advancement involved reverse engineering artifacts left behind by conquered civilizations. You want us to feel guilt for past conquests, Veltar said, trying to maintain his diplomatic composure, but history cannot be changed. The Empire has brought order to a chaotic galaxy. Chen turned to face him directly, and Veltar found himself unable to look away from the human's eyes. There was something infinite in that gaze, as if Chen had gained access to perspectives that spanned all of space and time. Guilt is not what I'm after, Chen said softly.
Guilt is a human emotion, useful for preventing future harm but worthless for understanding past mistakes.
What I want is comprehension. The ruins around them began to change, not physically but in ways that bypassed the Zephyrian delegation's normal senses. They could suddenly perceive the city as it had been, alive with beings whose thought patterns created visible harmonies in the air. They could feel the joy of artistic creation, the satisfaction of scientific discovery, the deep contentment of a civilization that had found balance. And then they experienced its destruction. Not the sanitized version recorded in official histories, but the reality of what conquest meant to the conquered. The terror of beings who had known only peace suddenly facing weapons they couldn't comprehend. The despair of artists watching their life's work reduced to tactical advantages. The final moments of children who had never hurt anyone, dying because their existence was inconvenient for imperial logistics. Several members of the diplomatic party collapsed, overwhelmed by the intensity of experiences that their minds had not evolved to process. Veltar remained standing, but only through an effort of will that left him trembling. This is what your empire truly creates, Chen explained, his voice gentle despite the devastating revelation he had just imposed upon them. Not order, not progress, not civilization. Just an endless succession of beautiful things destroyed for the sake of maintaining power. Veltar tried to speak, to argue that the Empire's conquests were necessary for galactic stability, but the words died in his throat. He had experienced the truth of Xerion's destruction, felt it from the perspective of those who had died to advance imperial interests. My son understood this, Chen continued, his voice taking on a note of pride mixed with infinite sadness. Marcus saw the pattern clearly, even at 17. He knew that resistance was hopeless by any conventional measure, but he chose to fight anyway. Do you know why? Veltar shook his head, no longer trusting his voice. Because humans don't measure success by victory, Chen explained. We measure it by whether we remained true to what we believed was right. Marcus died knowing that his death would teach his father something important about the nature of justice. The monument began to pulse with new patterns, and Veltar realized that it was incorporating the experiences of this conversation into its eternal record. Future visitors would be able to witness this moment, to understand the meeting between a grieving father and the representatives of the empire that had killed his child. So what happens now? Veltar finally managed to ask. Chen smiled again, and this time there was something almost paternal in his expression. Now you go back to your council and tell them what you've learned, and then we see whether the Zephyrian Empire is capable of growth, or whether it will simply continue repeating the same pattern until there's nothing left to destroy. The diplomatic party found themselves back aboard their ship without any memory of how they had returned. But the knowledge Chen had shared remained, burning in their minds like a flame that could never be extinguished. The Zephyrian High Council chamber had never hosted a debate quite like the one that erupted following High Arbiter Veltar's return from Xerion. The recordings of the diplomatic meeting were fragmentary at best, as if the very act of witnessing Dr. Chen's revelations had overwhelmed their recording equipment. But the memories of those who had been present were crystal clear, burned into their consciousness with a clarity that defied explanation. What that human showed us was nothing but psychological manipulation, declared Council Member Thexara, his voice carrying a tremor that contradicted his confident words. He used some form of mind control to make us experience fabricated emotions. These so-called visions cannot be accepted as evidence. But even as he spoke, Thexara could feel the weight of Xerion's true history pressing against his consciousness. The artistic achievements of the destroyed civilization, the beauty that had been traded for strategic positioning, the children who had died for the crime of existing in the path of imperial expansion. Council member Zarseth had remained silent since Veltar's initial report. Her 6 eyes focused on data streams that showed the current state of the Empire. Reports were flooding in from across their territory, describing spontaneous uprisings on dozens of worlds. Not coordinated military actions, but something far more dangerous. Populations that had suddenly begun to question the fundamental legitimacy of Zephyrian rule. "The human's influence is spreading," she announced, her voice cutting through the heated arguments of her colleagues. "Somehow, the knowledge he shared with our diplomatic team is propagating throughout the Empire. Our subject populations are experiencing the same revelations about our history." High Arbiter Veltar activated a holographic display showing rebellion reports from the past 72 hours. The pattern was unmistakable. Wherever the Empire had conquered civilizations known for their artistic or scientific achievements, the local populations were now rising up with a coordination that suggested shared understanding rather than centralized leadership. "This is impossible," protested Council Member Yexthon. "Information cannot spread faster than our communication networks. There must be some technological explanation," but Veltar knew better. During his encounter with Dr. Chen, he had gained a glimpse of the forces the human was working with. Technologies that operated according to principles the Empire had never suspected, sciences that treated consciousness and matter as different aspects of the same fundamental reality. "He's not spreading information," Veltar said quietly. "He's awakening knowledge that was already there. Every conquered population, every destroyed civilization left behind traces of their understanding. We've been walking through a galaxy full of memories, and now those memories are becoming active." The truth was more disturbing than any external invasion. The Zephyrian Empire had spent centuries accumulating the cultural and technological heritage of dozens of species, but they had never truly understood what they were taking. They had treated advanced civilizations like resource nodes, extracting useful technologies while discarding the wisdom that had created them. Dr. Chen hadn't introduced new knowledge into the galaxy. He had simply revealed connections that had always existed, showing conquered populations that they were part of a larger pattern of destruction and resistance. "Recommendations," Veltar demanded, though he suspected that traditional solutions would prove inadequate against an enemy who could reshape the fundamental structure of reality. Council Member Thexara stood, his crystalline features set with grim determination. "Deploy the final protocol. If this human possesses technologies beyond our understanding, then we must respond with our own ultimate weapons. The quantum destabilizers can unmake entire star systems. Let's see how his impossible ship handles exposure to weaponized entropy." The suggestion sent a chill through the council chamber. The final protocol represented the Empire's most desperate option, weapons that could literally unweave the fabric of space-time itself. They had been developed as a deterrent against hypothetical threats from beyond the galaxy, forces so powerful that conventional warfare would prove meaningless. But as Veltar considered the proposal, he realized that they might be facing exactly the kind of threat the final protocol had been designed to counter. Dr. Chen's ship operated according to principles that made their most advanced physics look primitive. If he truly possessed the ability to reshape reality at will, then perhaps only reality-destroying weapons could stop him. The final protocol requires unanimous council approval, Zarseth reminded them. Are we prepared to risk unmaking entire regions of space to stop one human? Before anyone could answer, the council chamber's communication system activated without any input from the assembled members. Dr. Chen's image appeared above the conference table, his presence somehow managing to dominate the room despite being nothing more than a holographic projection. Council members, he said, his voice carrying that same unsettling quality that seemed to speak directly to their consciousness. I understand you're considering extreme measures. Before you commit to a course of action that will have consequences beyond your ability to imagine, I'd like to share something with you. The holographic display shifted, showing images from across the galaxy. Zephyrian colonies that had been models of imperial efficiency just days earlier were now transforming into something entirely different. The rigid hierarchies that had maintained order were dissolving, replaced by cooperative networks that seemed to operate without central authority. Your empire is changing, Chen continued, his tone almost conversational, not through conquest or revolution, but through understanding. Your own citizens are beginning to see the galaxy as it really is, rather than how your propaganda has taught them to perceive it. The images showed Zephyrian citizens working alongside members of previously conquered species, their combined efforts producing technologies that neither group could have achieved alone. Art forms that blended different cultural traditions were emerging spontaneously, creating beauty that transcended individual species' limitations. This is impossible, whispered Council Member Yexthon. Zephyrians don't collaborate with inferior species. Our entire social structure is built on maintaining proper hierarchies. Chen's expression became almost paternal. Your social structure was built on fear and incomplete information. When beings truly understand their place in the cosmic order, cooperation becomes natural. Domination is revealed as the primitive response it has always been. High Arbiter Veltar found himself leaning forward, fascinated despite his terror. What do you want from us? What is your ultimate goal in all of this? I want you to understand what your son's death taught me, Chen replied, his voice taking on a note of infinite sadness. Marcus died believing that every conscious being in the galaxy deserves the chance to grow, to learn, to become something greater than they were before. Your empire has spent centuries preventing that growth, maintaining power by keeping populations ignorant of their potential. The holographic display showed the transformed Zephyrian fleets, ships that had been rebuilt according to principles that honored both function and beauty. The crews aboard those vessels were reporting discoveries that revolutionized their understanding of physics, biology, and consciousness itself. I'm offering your civilization the same choice I offered your military, Chen continued. You can continue trying to maintain control through force, or you can learn what it means to be part of something larger than yourselves. But understand that the universe itself is changing now. The old patterns of domination and submission are becoming impossible to maintain. The council chamber fell silent as the members processed the implications of what they were hearing. Their empire, the greatest political structure in known space, was dissolving not through external conquest, but through internal transformation. Their own citizens were evolving beyond the need for imperial authority. And if we refuse? Veltar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Chen's smile was infinitely sad. Then you'll discover what happens when beings who have transcended the need for power encounter those who still cling to it. The universe has room for both, but only one will shape the future. The transmission ended, leaving the council to contemplate a choice that would determine not just the fate of their empire, but the direction of galactic civilization itself. 6 months after the execution of Marcus Chen, the galaxy bore little resemblance to the rigid imperial structure that had dominated it for centuries. The transformation had not come through warfare or revolution, but through something far more profound: understanding. High Arbiter Veltar stood in what had once been the Zephyrian High Council chamber. Though it was difficult to recognize the space, the imposing hierarchical architecture had been replaced by flowing organic curves that somehow managed to accommodate beings of dozens different species. The rigid seating arrangements had given way to collaborative spaces where former enemies worked together on problems that no single civilization could solve alone. The change in Veltar himself was even more dramatic. His crystalline features still held their basic Zephyrian structure, but they now carried patterns that shifted with his thoughts, allowing him to communicate concepts that had no words in any traditional language. The transformation hadn't been forced upon him. It had emerged naturally as his understanding of the universe expanded beyond the limitations of imperial thinking. "The final reports are in," announced former council member Zarseth, though titles had become largely meaningless in the new galactic order. Her voice carried harmonics that conveyed emotional context alongside factual information, a communication method that made deception virtually impossible. The reports showed a galaxy in transition. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources were being restored by collaborative efforts that combined the environmental knowledge of destroyed civilizations with Zephyrian engineering expertise. Species that had been on the verge of extinction were being revived, their genetic patterns reconstructed from archaeological remains and cultural memories. "The Andromedans are requesting guidance on dimensional engineering," Zarseth continued. "Their exploration of parallel universes has uncovered civilizations that developed along completely different evolutionary paths. They want to establish diplomatic contact without risking contamination of either reality." Veltar nodded, though his attention was focused on the quantum communications array that connected this chamber to similar councils throughout the galaxy. The network operated according to principles that Dr. Chen had helped them understand, allowing instantaneous communication across any distance by treating consciousness as a fundamental force rather than an emergent property of matter. Through this network, he could sense the presence of beings working on projects that would have been impossible under the old imperial system. Zephyrian engineers were collaborating with Zerionite artists to create technologies that were simultaneously functional and beautiful. Former human resistance fighters worked alongside reformed imperial administrators to establish educational systems that honored the wisdom of all galactic civilizations. "What news from Dr. Chen?" Veltar asked, though he had already sensed the answer through the quantum network. "He remains in deep space," Zarseth replied. "The memorial to his son is nearly complete. He expects to return to normal space within the year." The memorial was Dr. Chen's final project, a structure that existed partially outside normal reality and served as a living testament to the billions of beings who had died during the imperial period. Not a monument to guilt or revenge, but a celebration of the potential that had been lost and a commitment to ensuring that such waste never occurred again. Veltar closed his eyes and extended his consciousness through the quantum network, touching briefly on the minds of beings scattered across hundreds of worlds. The diversity of thought and experience was overwhelming but no longer frightening. Under the old system, such diversity had been seen as a threat to order. Now it was recognized as the source of all genuine progress. In the Outer Rim territories, former human colonies were sharing their understanding of emotional resilience with species that had never developed strong social bonds. The exchange was transforming both groups, creating new forms of consciousness that honored individual identity while participating in collective purpose. Near the galactic core, ancient civilizations that had hidden from imperial expansion were emerging from their refuges to share knowledge that predated Zephyrian civilization by millions of years. Their understanding of cosmic cycles and dimensional mechanics was helping younger species prepare for challenges that transcended individual planetary concerns. Even the transformed imperial fleets had found new purpose, serving as mobile research stations and diplomatic platforms that could respond to crises anywhere in the galaxy. The ships themselves had become living entities, their organic hulls capable of adaptation and growth in response to changing circumstances. "There's something else," Zarseth said, her harmonic patterns indicating complex emotional content. "We've received a message from beyond the galactic rim. Deep space monitoring stations have detected structures that appear to be artificial, moving between galaxies at speeds that suggest technologies beyond even Dr. Chen's capabilities." Veltar opened his eyes, intrigued. The galaxy's transformation had been so complete that it was easy to forget that they existed within a larger universe, one that might contain civilizations and challenges they had never imagined. "Dr. Chen's assessment?" he asked. "He believes we're ready," Zarseth replied. "The structures appeared to be exploratory in nature, possibly the first contact attempts of a civilization that has been observing our development for some time. Our transformation from an imperial system to a collaborative network may have triggered their interest." The implications were staggering. Everything they had accomplished, the entire transformation of galactic civilization, might have been preparation for an encounter with forces that operated on an even larger scale. Through the quantum network, Veltar sensed the collective response of the galaxy's inhabitants to this news. There was excitement rather than fear, curiosity rather than defensiveness. The transformation that had begun with Marcus Chen's execution had created a civilization that was eager to grow rather than desperate to maintain control. Recommendations? Veltar asked, though the question was directed to the collective consciousness of the network rather than to Zarzeth alone. The response came from thousands of minds working in harmony, a synthesis of perspectives that no individual could have achieved. They would meet these new visitors with openness and genuine interest, sharing the story of their transformation and learning whatever lessons the encounter might provide. In the space between galaxies, Dr. James Chen sensed the network's decision and smiled. His son's death had taught him that love could transcend individual survival, that the willingness to sacrifice for others could create changes that rippled across entire civilizations. Marcus had died, believing that every conscious being deserved the chance to grow and learn. Now the galaxy itself embodied that principle, ready to embrace whatever wonders awaited in the larger universe. The boy who had been executed as a terrorist had become the inspiration for the greatest transformation in galactic history. And somewhere in the quantum foam that connected all conscious beings, his spirit lived on in every act of cooperation and understanding that his death had made possible. The education was complete. The real adventure was about to begin.